Hello. Good morning, everyone. We're going to try to start around 10 o'clock, right on the nose, because we have a pretty full agenda today. How's everybody doing? Awesome. Well, good morning. My name is Brian Van Weel. I'm Vice President of Philanthropy here at the Buck Institute, and we're delighted to have you with us today. Today's event is a special one. In some ways, it's a bonus community seminar. How many people have been to the community seminars we've been putting? Yeah, this is terrific. We can't thank you enough. Really, though, the seminar today is the original session that kind of kicked off and started all of them. It's the Levy Community Seminar. And today we're exploring a fascinating topic: decoding aging, AI, big data, and the future of precision health with Dr. Nathan Price. If you've ever wondered if artificial intelligence can be used by scientists to accelerate discoveries, especially when it comes to aging and disease prevention, we have a treat for you today. But before we dive in, a few housekeeping items. Number one, please silence your phones. Number two, and we like to keep our fire marshal happy, the emergency exits are located at the back of the room. So to kick things off, we're going to start with a short video that brings to life the mission and the people of the Buck Institute. Jordan?
The Buck Institute is interested in understanding aging, not only to make us live longer, but to actually alleviate and suppress the development of diseases.
Chronic disease is the great health challenge of our time. Aging is the main driver of chronic disease. To eliminate chronic disease, we must harness the biology of aging so we can live healthy longer. The Buck Institute is the world's first research organization dedicated solely to the biology of aging. We work with the building blocks of biology to understand how we age.
The Buck is concentrating on really trying to go to the root of the problem, so understanding that we can sort of intervene really early.
The Buck Institute is probably the best place in the world to be working on aging because there's so many different aspects of aging that are being studied. It's key because no one lab can do it all.
Our scientific explorers are brilliant, curious, and committed.
The idea that you could actually develop drugs that slow down the aging process was really something that 20 or 30 years ago people thought this cannot be done. Not only can it be done, but we will do it.
The pieces are in place. And we are in a unique position to put them together. Our world is defined by paradigm shifts, created by scientific discoveries. The biology of aging is the next frontier.
We're working toward a world where healthcare is better. It's a world where if we can eradicate the aging component to disease, we're all going to live healthier and longer.
It's just an incredible vision that really will, surpass anything else that we've ever seen before.
We are inviting you to a future of aging without illness. It's happening today, and it's happening here. Join us.
Before we get started, I want to make sure that all of you have note cards in case you want to ask questions. If you have a question, raise your card. A volunteer will come scoop it up and bring it directly to Chris Rebelo, our Senior Director of Communications, who's sitting right there, and we'll be chatting with Nathan after his presentation. Also, a special welcome to everyone joining us on Zoom today. We have a sizable Zoom audience. You can ask questions too. All you need to do is enter your questions in the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we will make sure those questions make their way to Chris. All right. So now, on with the Levy Community Seminar. We're going to say a few words about the family and the history real quick. Jordan? Perfect. These special gatherings have been made possible through the generosity of Bill and Elizabeth Levy and the Levy family. Their vision for this series has always been to share with our community the exciting science and breakthroughs on aging, and especially the research that has made the Buck Institute the global leader in this field. And it's no surprise that the Levy family and the Buck have shared such a long and enduring relationship. Bill and Elizabeth, in many ways, embodied the very spirit of the Buck mission. As medical professionals, Bill was a respected dermatologist right here in Marin, and Elizabeth, a dedicated nurse by his side for more than 30 years. They deeply valued science, research, education, and evidence-based care. In life, they were curious, adventurous, generous, and family-centered. They traveled the world together, and they kept family close to their hearts. They continued to care for their patients well into their later years, a reflection of their commitment and their compassion. At the Buck, we are working to unlock the biology of aging so that we can extend Healthspan, the healthy years of life. We want to help people live better, longer, with integrity, vitality, and compassion. And that is exactly the kind of life that Bill and Elizabeth lived, and it is the legacy that they have so generously entrusted to us. We are especially honored to welcome members of the Levy family with us today. Thank you for your presence, your support, and for the opportunity to remember and celebrate two extraordinary individuals. Thank you, Anna and Jeff. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Nathan Price, a visionary scientist who is helping shape the future of health and longevity. Dr. Price stands at the edge of AI systems biology, and precision medicine. He's a professor and co-director of the Center for Human Healthspan here at the Buck, where he's advancing a bold new field known as scientific wellness. His work is shifting the paradigm from treating disease to preventing it, from simply adding years to your life to making sure those years are replete with health, energy, and resilience. He's co-author of The Age of Scientific Wellness and was named one of the top 10 emerging leaders in health and medicine by the National Academy of Medicine. Dr. Price brings a compelling and hopeful vision for the future, one where AI helps decode aging, where your biology can guide prevention, and where extending Healthspan becomes the next great frontier for medicine. So please join me in welcoming today Dr. Nathan Price.
Thank you. Well, welcome to the Buck. Let me get this out of the way. I already have a mic. So it's a pleasure to be with everyone here today. The Buck's a very special place. It's wonderful to be here, and it's been, I'm the newest faculty member at the Buck, so I've been here for about 6 months, coming from having been a professor for about 15, 16 years now. And today I just want to talk about all the things that Brian just introduced you to. And so we'll talk about AI, big data, the future of precision health, or scientific wellness. But I want to start by just contemplating slightly the moment in history that we're at. And I think for so many of us, maybe the biggest story in the world right now is the birth of AI. We've seen it in movies. We've talked about it for a long time. I think when you started playing your first time with ChatGPT, you started watching the videos of the robots I watched one breakdancing the other night, which was pretty interesting. It's hard not to feel like this moment that we've thought about and contemplated is kind of on top of us. And none of us really know like what that future brings. And I think the stakes of this are kind of beyond, almost sort of at the edges of our imagination in a sense. There's the future, the dystopian future of AI, see every sci-fi movie ever, and there is the maybe positive version of AI. And one of the really positive versions of AI that people talk about a lot is that we might be entering a century of endless abundance, right, where labor is ubiquitous, we can make sort of everything, and that's not going to be what I'm going to focus on today so much, other than just to say that the one thing that we could deliver by being able to apply intelligence at a scale that hasn't been possible before is that we actually want that to be towards health. And is there a way that we can harness these emerging new capabilities in such a way that it actually makes a difference to the kind of things that make the most difference in our actual lives? Can we stay alive? Can our loved one who is dying from cancer, can we actually stop that? We're not very good at that right now. Can we bring Alzheimer's patients back from the brink? Can we, et cetera, all the things that we might wish. And every one of us can think of a loved one that we would desperately wish had not died or had desperately wish we could make their pain go away. And one of the elements that I think is, that I think about all the time and that we write about in the book, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, is that, our medicine is okay. Our ability to deal with acute injuries and acute difficulties is pretty good. But there's still so much that we don't control. And so one of the really big hopeful things right now is, can we contemplate ways that we can start to utilize this new emerging technology such that we move forward? Now, I want to caveat this with saying that there is a very long way to go. And that what we're going to see, and this is, I was just chatting with a gentleman right before, right, we're talking about Ray Kurzweil's book, right? He wrote a book called The Singularity is Near, which has been very predictive of what's been happening in AI. He's got a new book, The Singularity is Nearer, which is going through some of these things. Actually, yeah, it's great. Anyway, he also has a health book that he's written called Transcend, with the fabulous tagline, "Live long enough to live forever." It's a great tagline. Not mine, unfortunately, but it is a great tagline. But one point about these exponential rises that I do want to focus on for a moment is what we're going to see is that when you look at these kind of exponential impacts and you evaluate it on a short time span, you're going to be very tempted to think we're not making as much progress as we should, and to then write off kind of what we can achieve in the future. So we tend to overestimate what we're going to achieve in the next couple of years and underestimate what we're going to achieve in the next decade. And in fact, even some of those predictions from Kurzweil, which were thought very outlandish, in fact, at least with AI, it looks like we're maybe a year or two earlier than all the things that people thought he was crazy for predicting. So anyway, I just wanted to start with that the future of AI in health is going to be very uneven. There's certain pockets where we can apply this immediately. That won the Nobel Prize last year, right? The ability to predict protein sequences. AI leaped us radically farther. You could take the whole history of doing protein structures for decades, and AI has now eclipsed that. I forget the exact percentage, but something like 99.999% of structures are now developed by AI in the last year compared to the previous history. So there's certain pockets where if we can take the right kind of data and get it into a form where you can apply these AIs, you can leap forward. There are other areas that are incredibly hard. Like, for example, can an AI solve a cancer? Maybe, but how do we actually give it the information to do it? And how do we do it in ways that are safe for humans, right? We're not going to just sacrifice, trial and error inside of these situations. So it's very complicated how we might do this, but that's why there's a lot of excitement in this area as well as a lot of trepidation. So we're at the buck, right? So what is aging? One definition of aging that you may have seen in these seminars is just the notion that year over year, our risk of disease is ticking upwards. And that's something that we would like to figure out how to stop. This gives a big focus on health span, right? The range of time where we're going to spend healthy, and we'd like to extend that as much as possible. We're talking about AI in the far future. I was catching up on a book the other day when I was driving up to give a seminar at RPI. Even that sounds dated to me. I was driving up. Of course, my car drove me here today. I don't really drive anymore. Anyway, but this was last year, so I was driving up, and I was listening to a book, and this is not a new book. It's an old book written 2,000 years ago by one of the Stoics. But just by coincidence, on the audiobook as it came up was a segment on longevity, and he put this in a way that I really loved. So 2,000 years ago, Seneca wrote, "For it makes a great deal of difference whether a man is lengthening his life or his death." Okay? And that is what we're trying to do, is how do we extend life? I just wrote an article, submitted it yesterday, called why the biggest opportunity for AI in healthcare isn't disease, it's wellness. And this is why. Because what we actually want to do is intervene early and extend wellness rather than just thinking about disease. We think about this in the organizations of groups like the National Institutes of Health in the United States, which doesn't actually have an Institute of Health, it only has Institutes of Disease. But that's starting to, we're starting to see some changes in that over the last few years. So the way that I come into this is, as was mentioned, something that we call scientific wellness, right? So how do we extend health span? How do we extend our health? And this is something that Lee Hood and I, who's also given one of these, I think recently, did together for about a decade or so. And one of the elements of this was that we'd had a lot of data and a lot of studies that were focused on disease, right, for the reasons that I just mentioned. But we don't have a lot of really dense data coming from people who are in their healthy state. And it turns out that you really want to gather as much information as possible throughout the course of your healthy life to try to have some sort of a map for how do I maintain that, how do I come back to it. So what we did here was before I jump into that, so this sets the stage then for trying to jump into wellness. So as I said, this is starting to shift. So this is a 2022 report. This was done by Deloitte, which is one of these big industry consulting firms, and they're doing a forecast of the $4 trillion spend that we do annually on healthcare in the United States. And one of the things that they show here, which I think is pretty remarkable, is they're showing about a $2 trillion shift away from care of disease towards this upper right corner there, right, of promoting health. So they're predicting that this will happen by 2040. So we're starting to see these tailwinds of a shift in the focus of healthcare. Now, this is still very challenging. Business models around healthcare, business models around disease are not nearly as well developed around health are not nearly as well developed as they are for disease. But we are starting to see this change. I also wrote this piece on the right for Scientific American, going through the emergence of a wellness-based industry, or a scientific wellness-based industry, as we'd call it. So there's more and more ways that you can get access to information, trying to forecast health, trying to maintain it. One example that I think is really clear and poignant is in Alzheimer's disease. So we've spent something like on the order of $200 billion over the course of the last few decades trying to develop late-stage treatments for Alzheimer's. But if you just think about what it means to try to cure someone of late-stage Alzheimer's, what does that actually mean? For one, a whole bunch of the neurons in their brain have died. And billions, trillions, of synapses, all those connections that give us our memories and code who we are gone. How could we possibly imagine that you could take a small molecule, chemical, in a pill and regenerate your brain? I have no clue in the world how that would happen. And I think it's totally fanciful, just to be clear. I could imagine some sci-fi ways you might do this, right? You have a mapping, in an AI system, right? That remembers all these things. You have you have stem cells with intelligent agents inside that can then go and recreate. You could imagine it, right? But that's not anywhere around the corner. That's like way far out there. But prevention is actually very doable. Prevention is stopping those neurons from dying in the first place. And I don't have time to get into all the issues behind this, which is actually a pretty fascinating story around Alzheimer's, but related to loss of energy necessary to keep the neurons alive. And so if you want to do that, though, you can do way better under the auspices of prevention. And you can actually build digital twin models and simulate like personalized health plans and so forth to take people through that kind of a journey. Of course, this is not a totally novel concept, right? How much harder it is to reconstruct things than it is to keep them safe. We've mostly known this since we were about 3 years old. That's the story of Humpty Dumpty. So if you recall that story, that is basically the same. So as we started thinking about scientific wellness, to make this more concrete, Lee Hood and I set out about 12 years ago at the start to build out a lot of data in health, right? So we wanted to amass a lot of data so we could start to apply computational techniques, try to understand what could we learn, what could we know from this. And we ended up getting about 5,000 people and over a course of about 4 or 5 years to monitor health. And this was the deepest data study that had ever been done on wellness and in a kind of a non-diseased population. And I'm going to show you a bunch of results from this just to give you a sense for what was happening. So just to ground you in this to begin with, so we're doing whole genome sequencing on everybody, right? So the 3 billion letters that define each of us uniquely. We were making about 1,200 different measurements out of the blood. So dynamic measurements to see what's happening to you based on your environment and your lifestyle and so forth. We're also measuring your gut microbiome, so these thousands of species of different microbes that live in your gut. And then also monitoring with various wearable devices, whichever one you want. Or I've got 3 on at the moment, so it's a low day, but it's okay. And so I don't know how many of you have these. So you can monitor a lot of these different elements. But the idea is that if you can really participate in improving the wellness in people's lives, if they stay with you over time, then you create what we call personal dense dynamic data clouds. And you start to have an individualized trajectory of what a health trajectory looks like, what early warning signs for disease might look like, and so forth. Okay, so I want to talk about a few results of what we've learned out of this, starting with the microbiome. So one of the things we noticed is that when we started applying computational technologies to try to understand these vast data sets, one of the things we noticed was that starting around age 50, the degree, your microbiome starts looking less and less like anyone else's. And so you're kind of on this journey with your microbiome. And so after age 50, we developed this score called uniqueness, which is just how different are you from all the other thousands of people that we have data on. And we see this come up. And so as we look at this, though, what we found was that it happened in some people and not in others. And it only happened for people that were on what we would call a healthy aging trajectory. So when we go on and we look for people in their old age, and we look here and we say, do they still walk quickly when they're older? They had high microbiome uniqueness. If they rank their health as being particularly high, they had high uniqueness. And in fact, in an elderly cohort, we looked at, and this is people over 80, what we found over here to the right, this is what's called a Kaplan-Meier curve. So every declination in that curve is someone dying. But what we saw was that there was a difference, and that it was actually predictive of who would be most likely to go on to live for the next 4 years or not. And you could do that actually from a signature in the microbiome. So the microbiome seems to have a role, we're still learning about it more, but a role in your health as you get older. Now, even though the species of the microbiome were diverging, we saw lots of commonalities in the metabolites that were made. And this is another connection between how all these different elements of your body are densely connected. So as we were building out our data set, the big thing we wanted was lots of dense stacks of data. Because what do you do, and this is what happens typically in government grants, right? Someone studies the microbiome, someone studies the metabolome, you learn a little here, you learn a little there, but until you build something that's big, longitudinal, and stacked, you don't know how the pieces fit together. And so here, one of the things we saw was that even though there were all these diversity in the microbiome, that the compounds that were coming up were shared. So things like indoles or p-cressyl sulfate were associated with positive health. Certain other elements like TMAO, which is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, and you only get that, by the way, if you have certain bacteria in your gut. What those bacteria will do, just to give you an idea, so there's two elements that you would eat that would come into your body. One's carnitine in red meat, for example. Another is phosphatidylcholine in eggs, for example. Phosphatidylcholine is thought to have positive effects for both your liver and your brain, which we could get into. But let's say you're eating eggs kind of hoping for that, or you might take a supplement with it or whatever. If you have certain bacteria in your gut, it will eat the phosphatidylcholine and turn it into something called trimethylamine, which your liver turns into TMAO, which is a risk factor for your heart. So you could literally be trying to optimize your diet or supplements or something like this towards improving your brain, and instead, on accident, do something to hurt your heart. So this is the kind of thing with AI systems that we're building out, such that it will know all of these intricacies. You won't have to necessarily know that. You can if you want. You can, with LLMs, you can, ChatGPT, you can kind of ask whatever you want. But that's one of the big benefits of the AI systems, is that you can take all this intricate complexity and you don't have to worry about remembering, oh, what did Dr. Price say at that meeting? I forget, but it will actually know. So that's useful. These systems, as I mentioned, are also very densely interconnected. So your blood metabolome, so these small molecules that are circulating in your blood, can actually predict for you how diverse your microbiome is. And it captures about half of the variance. And so we developed a predictor out of the blood for how the diversity in the microbiome was shifting. And what we saw was that it would hold up robustly across a whole range of different conditions, whether it was moving up or down or whatever. There was only one condition in which it totally was destroyed, and that was in extreme obesity. So if we saw a BMI above about 35 or so, then that relationship went basically to zero. And so you lost this really dense interconnection of information. Another one that was quite interesting is that we took, again, just applying computation on the big data, and as we get into the AI systems, and basically what we saw was we wanted to see if we could predict at baseline, when people came through the wellness program we were running, who would go on to lose weight. And we tried to, and so we controlled for BMI, because the heavier you are, the more likely it was you would have the possibility for losing weight, so that was predictive. But once we controlled for that, to my great surprise, we found no signal in the metabolites. The metabolome was not predictive of who would go on to lose weight. The proteome was not predictive. That also slightly surprised me. I was very surprised by the metabolites. You might find this surprising. People saying what they ate had no predictive ability. It was trending a little bit higher there, but it wasn't significant. The only thing that actually did predict whether or not people would go on to lose weight in this cohort was the gene content of their microbiome. And the most important factor was, if you had genes that were more likely to take complex let's say you eat a sweet potato, right? So you have complex carbohydrates coming in. For some people, their microbiome would more preferentially break that down into simple sugars, cause more of an insulin spike, a much harder time losing weight. If another person ate that same sweet potato and they had a different microbiome, it would break it more preferentially down into short-chain fatty acids, one of which is butyrate. Those people had a much easier time losing weight. What we didn't know at the time, but do now, is that butyrate from the microbiome is actually also stimulatory to natural GLP-1 secretion. So not anything like the level of power that you get from the drug, just to be clear, but connected. Interesting, right? So, but the microbiome was the only thing that we found in all this vast data that was predictive. Didn't know that going in. We also find that these things are important for the effects of drugs. So if you're on a statin, and I would guarantee there's a lot of people in here on a statin over a certain age, a big fraction of the population gets on a statin. And we look at this in part for lowering LDL cholesterol. So one thing we did, and again, this is just driven by letting the algorithms go to work on the data. So one thing we found is we split the microbiomes into 4 large groups, just using unsupervised clustering. And what we found was that for one of these groups, there was double the lowering of LDL cholesterol from a statin that there was from the others. That's a huge effect. That's way bigger than any known human genetic impact. So the microbiome appeared to have quite a large impact on the efficacy of the statin. The other element of the statin is that you get an almost 10% rise in the rate of diabetes for people on statins. And what we found was that it only happened in 2 of the microbiome groups and not in the other 2. So now what we're doing is we're working with a great collaborator, Sean Gibbons at ISB, who's really pushing this forward. But can we now do prospective trials to see, can we shift a microbiome in such a way that it would make your statin more efficacious or block the likelihood of the transition towards diabetes? So this is very much of a black box, and it's one of the areas that pharma doesn't study that much. No matter how much I tell them they should. So oh well. So we can also learn a lot from looking at biological age. You've probably seen a lot of that here. Biological age is basically the age that your body says that you are, right, as opposed to the age that your calendar says that you are. And we applied one approach to doing this. I won't go through the details, and I'm being a little mindful of time. I want to get to the end as well. But basically, we took these 1,200 measures and just said, if all we knew about you was your data cloud, how old would we say that you are? We fit a curve to that. We do it in such a way that we force the slope of the line to be very close to 1. That's really important if you're going to actually use this longitudinally, because it means that there's the expectation that you would tick up 1 year per year. The population on average would do that. And so you can always come up with a score. The question is it meaningful? And so the way that we looked at this is we had data on a whole bunch of different diseases shown here, and we looked at the biological age for people with and without the disease. And what we found was that, and you'll see all these little stars that are there, that means there was statistical significance. And what I want you to notice is that every single one of those stars is on the right side, and there's none that are on the left side. And what that meant was that in every case where there was a statistically significant signal, we found higher biological age associated with the disease and not the opposite. So that was indicative that the score was relevant to health. Now, more importantly, we wanted to see, could this be modified? So we looked at people who had been going through this wellness program and what happened to their biological age score by this metric as they did so. And this is what we found. Overall, we found that the biological age in that population going through scientific wellness, on average, was going down by 0.16 years per year. So that's a 1.16 year improvement over the expectation that you'd tick up 1 per year. Women did particularly well. They were losing a half a year per year on this score during the years of this program. Men did not quite as well, but still very well, where they were going up at a rate of 1 year every 5 years. And so these kind of measures, at least of health, are malleable. If you're worried about this, there's no worry that the women are going to go out the backside and go, below 0 or something. So there is, the further you get away from your biological age, from your chronological age, the harder it is to move. So this only works within a certain window. But you do see an ability to improve health, at least according to these kind of measures. And this is a study that we did on 3,500 people. So both health relevant, and it is possible to improve it. You can also look at this multi-omic data and look early in people. And one of the things that we were really interested in, I'll just come back to LDL cholesterol as an example. So one of the things that is true is that you can actually predict a fair amount about your LDL cholesterol level from your genome. So that means I don't know what you're eating. I don't know if you're overweight or underweight or have a disease. I know literally nothing about you except the genome sequence. You can bucket those groups and it still captures some of the variance. So there's just internal differences in the baseline level of this marker subject to the genome. That information is not used at all in the clinic. today. I mean, maybe there's a couple boutique clinics that do, but at large, it is not used. So one of the questions we had was, does it matter if you have high LDL cholesterol, if it was because of your genes or not? So the question we had was, as people were going through a wellness program, could they lower their LDL cholesterol by lifestyle, right? So, other than on a statin, for example. And what we found was that the genome predicted the outcome of a lifestyle intervention, which is that when they went through this program, if their genome predicted that they could be low, they dropped significantly. But if their genome predicted them high, we saw no statistical change. And so what that means then is that it introduces an entirely new category of variable into healthcare, which again is not utilized today, which is not only what is your biomarker, but what is the genetic prediction of your biomarker. There's a big gap, it's movable. And if there's not, it's not. And so we're actually working now with a couple of different groups to build out programs on this so that we can get that out as, so we can get that out to doctors, and actually are building this into AI systems so that we can deliver this kind of information. In the interest of time, I'm only showing you LDL cholesterol, but it's true for a whole bunch of other markers as well. And of course, you could do a mapping of it across every single marker in quite a readily available way, and just figure out where the genetics matter. You can also track people over time. So here's a particular marker. Here's a marker called CEACAM5. This is a known marker for cancer metastasis. But what wasn't known is, does it arise early in people? And so we were going through our wellness program, and we observed the following, which is that we had a woman, she was 57, and she came in and she had very elevated CEACAM5 levels. Time point 1, 6 months later, time point 2, the same, time point 3, the same, time point 4, the same, and then gets diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. So probably findable. As I mentioned this, I should characterize, these were proteins that we measured after the fact. We were, by law, not allowed to measure these and give them back to people during the program for research, just to be clear about that. But anyway, but we see she had pancreatic cancer metastatic probably at least 2 years before diagnosis. A man coming through our program, 69. So here, a little bit elevated, right? You might, if you were really monitoring this, you might be a little bit worried about that. Time point 2, you'd be a little more worried. It's ticking up. Time point 3, now you're really worried. It's shooting up. Time point 4, emergency. Again, 2 years in advance. These are all 6 months apart. Ends up getting metastatic lung cancer. Again, probably observable. Another woman, time point 1. So she's low here, right? All's good. She likely doesn't have a metastatic cancer. Next one pops here. Now this is interesting because this is within normal range, so you wouldn't think about it, except that jumping that far in 6 months is very unusual. So that dynamic is also an issue. So if you're tracking this closely, you'd say, I'd be worried about that. And then look at time point 3. She jumps way up and she gets breast cancer. And by the way, I just want to point out, I'm not cherry picking. These are the only 3 people that got metastatic breast cancer of the that got metastatic cancer of the 5,000 people we did. So I don't have a huge N on this, right? It's not a big clinical trial, but we just observe it in people that, because we're the first group that really deeply phenotyped a bunch of people, just starting from wellness and watching to see what happens on people's trajectories. Okay, so in my last 47 seconds, I'm going to talk so where are we going, right? So I've shown you a lot of data, kind of with the kind of things that we're learning, and now, the big push here at the Buck is pushing towards digital twins and what I call the N of 1 analyzer. And so the N of 1 analyzer is an attempt to take, I showed you lots of little pieces of interesting information as we came along, but now what we want is an algorithm, right, that can take all of that synthesis about what's happening in your body. So rather than do population A versus population B, how do we do that? And so one of the elements of this is building what we call virtual systems biologists. And so what this is is a new AI system, and it leverages a lot of the latest advances on with these large language models, the generative AI systems, such that we can take and do what we call deep reasoning on your data. So rather than statistical pattern matching, which is basically how all these things have been done in the past, it can leverage all of the information across PubMed, all of the published literature to say, well, if we look in your data and we see here a bunch of these proteins have all of a sudden jumped, well, what do we know about their biology? These metabolites have changed. What do we know about their biology? And so it lets us really dive deep. And the way we're building this is in two different parts. And I like to harken back to this great book by Daniel Kahneman, very famous. I'm sure many of you have read it, Thinking Fast and Slow. And what does that look like, at least to us in AI and aging? So fast here is we're applying deep learning, and you take all of this huge mess of data, and there's a lot of noise in there. But by using these things called variational autoencoders, you can take all that information and you can break it down into, I don't want to get too technical here, anyway, into these combinations that represent the essence of changes that are really combinations of lots of different measurements at the same time. And we're showing that you can learn patterns even in one disease and apply it into another disease, and these things are conserved to a reasonable degree. So that's what we call fast. That's all that big data analysis that I showed you, all those little pieces. And then the slow here is building on top of the LLM technologies. And so what we've built here then on our virtual systems biologists is a way to configure and let these things go and think and work, for minutes to hours, and simulate very deep dives into the literature to come back and figure out what do we think's happening on an end of one person's body, And so that is kind of the frontier of where we're going right now. So with that, I'm going to conclude. So AI in health represents, I think, an incredibly transformative opportunity. I think we will see pockets. There will be certain narrow pockets that will move quickly. Most will move sort of slowly, and then as we get the breakthrough, you'll see it pop in like a big way. I went through a number of different observations there, and then I'll just say that I think that the opportunity now to take three converging megatrends, AI, deep phenotyping or big data, and systems biology, how all these pieces fit together, put us at the cusp of what we believe is going to be a really big revolution at the intersection of AI and aging here at the Buck. With that, I'm happy to take questions. Thank you. And you want the question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for a great presentation. So, got a lot of questions already. I'm going to make a little announcement, which is a lead-in to one of the questions. Many of you were here for Lee Hood's community seminar last month, and he talked about genomic testing and the possibility of bringing that to the Buck community. So here's what we know. The Buck is currently working on identifying a partner who would give us favorable pricing at a quality and depth that means analysis suitable to all of us. Dr. Hood and others are working on this now, and we hope to have it available to you shortly. You will get the word as soon as we get the word. So Nathan, I got a bunch of questions. Yeah, I know, pretty cool, huh? Got a bunch of questions. Your information about the microbiome was fascinating. People want to know, can they get their microbiome tested today? Like, what's possible today?
Yes, you can get your microbiome tested today. So I am involved in one company that does a microbiome test, just for the interest of disclosure. So Thorne has a microbiome test that you can do and get a lot of these things. There are a number of other ones that are out there that you can do. I think Day 2 went out of business. They had one that I really quite liked. But yes, you can get consumer microbiome tests out there in the world today, and you can do measurements in your house. Yeah.
And then somebody wants to know, with the genomic tests, is that going to give people information on the CCAM5, the genes that you talked about, which enhance the possibility for cancer?
Yeah, CEACAM5 is a protein measured out of the blood. So it's not just a genetic marker. So you're actually watching that like go up. Doctors' offices will do CEACAM5. They don't do it for screening. And there are certain reasons for that. I didn't get into we saw some signal that I think would be pretty concerning. There are a lot of elements that you have to go through to get this to be an approved test for screening. Because the accuracy rates you need are incredibly high if you're going to screen a general population. It gets better if you have reason to believe. So it is something that doctors will screen for like cancer recurrence and things like that. So that's probably how you would get access to that today.
Question about the microbiome and antibiotics. The impact of antibiotics and how do you best recover from that?
Yeah, so antibiotics will decimate the microbiome. I zipped through it a little bit quickly in the interest of time, but you might have seen when we made that metabolomic predictor of microbiome change that there was a huge shift down for antibiotics. The metabolites that reflect that also, the prediction shifted way down, so it was captured in what you see in the blood. So they will be decimated. So in general, if you need to go on them, and you should avoid overusing them. There's also ancillary problems of antimicrobial resistance that arises if you don't do full courses and all this. Then you really want to get on a course of probiotics and prebiotics to get back to a healthy microbiome. One of the biggest opportunities for shifting your microbiome is actually after antibiotics, because you've decimated so much, you actually have a lot of space. Because a lot of times if you're just in your normal life taking a probiotic, it can often like just go straight through you because it has to outcompete the microbes that are there, and they're pretty good. And so they've won for a lot of times in a row because that's why they're there. And so it becomes an opportunity. So if you're coming back from that, yeah, you'll want to get, some various good bacterial strains. There's a number out there. Lactobacillus is very, very common one. Akkermansias, things like this you could find. And then also things like fermented foods and so forth can really make a difference. So, kombucha, sauerkraut, things of that nature help to rebuild a microbiome.
I had a question
Fibers.
right here about sauerkraut. We just took care of that one.
Good.
Somebody wants to know, can you speak to LMHR, lean mass hyperresponders? Do you know anything about that? It's okay to say no.
I don't really know much about that. I mean, I know that there are a lot of efforts I know that the maintenance of lean muscle as you get older is radically important. And it is probably the biggest worry with the GLP-1 drugs and so forth is, that need to maintain muscle, especially as you get older. It's one of the strongest predictors of longevity because it has to do with frailty. Peter Atiyev's, of course, has popularized this like crazy with his longevity Olympics and so forth. But it's really true. You want to watch that trend of the decline and stay off it as much as possible. But I don't know about the hyper-responders in particular.
Please say more about the digital twin model. And I know that's your N1 project. So give an overview of what that's going to entail and what's it going to look like.
Yeah, so digital twins have, and they're pretty nascent in biology. They're actually much more advanced in other areas, like in airplanes and so forth. We were talking about that before, because those are areas where we really understand. So we did some work, when I was at a different organization, we had done a lot of work on a certain style of digital twin that was a little more based in mechanism and like feedback loops. And we're able to show, an ability to forecast kind of the length of years that you might stay healthy under certain assumptions. What we're doing here at the Buck is trying to really leverage on these new AI technologies. So the idea here is that you can absorb any sort of genetic testing that you might have, any sort of blood testing that you might have, and it can be quite flexible. And so the system that we're building will take in all of that as an input, and then you're building models that will allow us to say something about what we think are the most actionable things that would move you back into a really good health regime. So for example, it includes a lot of the elements that I talked about, right? So if it notices you have these kind of bacteria, right, that are making TMAO, like that would be a bad thing. So then that would lead to dietary advice about, probably lower your red meat consumption on that front. That would be kind of a clear one that you would get a lot of advice around that. It would be, it would know things like if you see certain genetic variants, like there's 6 variants in vitamin D that block uptake of vitamin D. If you have those, or multiple of those, that suggested that either you need a lot more time in the sun, or probably you should supplement with vitamin D given how often we're indoors and so forth. So that would be like a piece that would come in. So the way that this is going to be delivered to people is going to be primarily through a large language model type interface. So it will auto-generate reports, and we're working on this right now, and then it will, but it basically takes the context, applies reasoning from all the biomedical literature, and then outputs what it thinks is the most vital, like 3 recommendations for this month, that kind of thing. And we'll set it up.
So do you have any kind of sense of when this is going to be a real thing, like, available? And also, I've gotten a lot of questions about how the heck are we going to get this into the healthcare system? Yeah,
so on the EDIM one, so we're just kind of finalizing a contract with the group that's pretty interested in sponsoring this. So we'll have some pretty hard deliverables on this in 18 months. So yes, we will be building this out as well. We already are building out as fast as humanly possible. So just trying to get it, resource, manpower, time, we're pushing all those. So we're working on that front a lot. There's also really big efforts that we're involved in. Both Eric and I actually serve as advisors to the Million Genome Project in the United Arab Emirates, for example, and they're generating a lot of this kind of data. So there will be a lot of development that will be done in partnership with them as well. There is, there's some, big groups here in the U.S. that are very interested in that. There's a few other smatterings of elements, but there is just so much interest coming in right now that it's just a kind of a race to get these things out. And there will be some pieces that you'll even see in the in the commercial world in not too distant future too.
So you mentioned wearables. You wear wearables. Advice for folks here who may not be as clued into what it all means as you are. Like, what do you recommend? What's the best value that folks can get from whatever investment they make in wearables? Yeah,
so for me at least, I've worn wearables for many years, and I do quite like them. I find them as a nice reminder. I like things that will gather data passively, so I don't have to think about it all the time. But if I'm thinking about it today, it's like, all right, what did my sleep pattern look like over the last 3 months, or have I changed? So a lot of these are getting better at pulling out insights. So Apple Health will tell me, oh, your weight is, 10 pounds lighter over the last 30 days than it was the previous 4 months or something, or it will tell me your step count has either gone up or down. Usually that's because I've moved or traveled, or I don't know, there's all kinds of things, but it kind of picks up on those long-term trends. One that I like quite a lot is the Whoop, because they've also implemented an AI system, a chatbot, so you can actually just ask your question into the Whoop and it will answer it from the data. It's not perfect, but it's a very nice kind of beta, so I do like that one. Oh, and just to be clear here, I have no disclosures on wearable device. I have no interest in any of these companies at the moment. And so the Oura Ring I like for sleep because I just find it easier to wear something on my finger for sleep than I do on the watch. And I know there are people that feel the opposite. So it's kind of like finding your form factor and what you like. Some of the elements that are like heart rate variability, I think is a really important metric. VO2 max is a really important metric. The Apple Watch is terrible at estimating VO2 max. The Whoop is like pretty good. Anyway, we have multiple examples of looking at that. But, yeah.
But you recommend them for people who really do want to have a sense of keeping track of how they're doing?
I do, because I think, resting heart rate, which is a very basic one, right? But you'd like to see that going down. Are you actually making progress? How you're sleeping, you of course, can feel that one quite strongly. But what you don't notice so much are the long-term patterns. There's been many times when people ask, when do you go to bed? I'm like, I go to bed about 10 every day. And you look at your data, you're like, it varies a lot. And it's like, okay, sometimes I do. And you tend to remember the half of the time that you're pretty good, and you don't think about the half of the time that you're, on the other side of the earth or whatever, but anyway.
So we've gotten a few questions about supplements. Somebody is curious about creatine supplements and their impact on health and longevity, and whether there's any genetic variation that impacts that, or others. What do these folks need to know about supplements?
Yeah, that's a great question. Creatine, I think, has one of the best evidence bases of any supplements. I do take creatine every day. I'm contemplating upping my dosage after a few things I just read from Rhonda Patrick just did a really interesting episode on this. Creatine, at least in many studies, seems to have an impact on improving muscle mass. There was one negative study on it that came out last week, that I want to look at, but there's been a bunch of positive ones. They actually, in their conclusions, say that they think it might require a higher dose. I don't know. We'll have to look at the details on that. But there have been a lot of studies over time that show that. There's some emerging evidence that this might be useful for the brain. That was a study I just saw this morning, so I need to look at it in more detail, but was claiming that they got acute benefits to the brain with like it was a high dose, was like 25 to 30 milligrams. That was not consistent usage, but I did see a paper that was claiming that this morning. I need to vet that more. But in general, I think creatine is a really a good one. I think it's good pretty much throughout life because it's good for younger when you're trying to build muscle. It's good when you're trying to maintain it as you're older. And there's at least hints that it might have some good neuroprotective if you can get sort of enough of it in. Supplements in general, is a category that you have to watch with some caution, but I'm also like and I should also caveat or disclose like I am the chief science officer for Thorne, which is one of the largest supplement companies, which generally is rated as the top quality supplement maker in the United States. At least it was on a recent survey, which was nice. So I am someone that likes those, and the reason that I got into that space is because if you're thinking about scientific wellness and you want to intervene in sort of precise ways while you're still healthy, you can't have something that has the side effect profile of a drug. And so I think natural products kind of become an obvious place. Now the flip side of this, and this is I am pretty passionate about, so the effects of a supplement, and we saw this when we were doing the digital twin work as well. Every once in a while, if it hits like just the thing that you're missing, can have a big effect. I had one of the things that got me into this space initially was, I had a friend who was super smart guy, was getting his PhD. He was going to drop out though because he's just like, I'm not into this anymore. He's like, I don't know why, I've kind of lost my lust, whatever. Anyway, he was questioning life philosophies, like, maybe I've gone the wrong direction. Anyway, goes down a path. Turns out he's iron deficient. He starts taking an iron pill. He's like immediately back better. He goes to MIT. He goes to a hedge fund. He becomes a director of AI at Amazon. Freaking genius, like good friend of mine, And his whole life could have been ruined because he was iron deficient, And so that was like an early thing for me where I was like, why? And I know a few people where it just hits. That said, most of the time, a supplement's going to have a mild effect. And most of the time, it's not sufficient. And so on its own. And so what I'm really a big proponent of, and I'm going to stop myself from going down a long rabbit hole here, what I'm a proponent of though is I think that the way that we do prevention trials in this space is largely wrong. Because most of these prevention trials focus on one element, and when you do that, very often you're kind of depending on sheer dumb luck for that to be like the final piece of the puzzle, and it usually isn't. And so it has a big effect for a few people, but for a lot of people it won't really do much of anything. That said, when we've done digital twin simulations based on personalized optimization of combinations, we see that the prediction switches and it starts saying, hey, 80 or 90% of people will benefit by figuring out like what is actually going on. So I'm pushing hard on the notion that clinical trials and prevention shouldn't be necessarily focused on like one compound. They should be focused on a digital twin algorithm that represents the entirety of what we think we understand about that process, such that every person in the trial is getting a personalized set of recommendations from the algorithm. Then it's the algorithm that you actually test. And I am, of course, a huge proponent in evidence. So test, see what it's like. And then the other thing I'm a huge proponent in is testing. Test your body, what's actually useful to you, and test afterwards, did it actually do what you wanted it to do?
So you and I have talked about this prior, perfect lead-in. So there's really no normal, right? And what's the issue when we focus on are we normal?
There is no normal. So there's a great book called The End of Average by Todd Rose. And it's a book, and maybe Lee mentioned it's one of his favorite books too, but this was sort of a bizarre thing that they did. So in like the 1940s, 1950s, there was some theory out there that beauty was defined by being the average. Like, so if you had the exact average of nose and eyes and arm length and it was just a weird thing. So they started this weird contest to try to find the most average man and woman in the United States that had the most features that were average, right? I was like, okay, a weird PR move. But anyway, so that's what they wanted to do. But what comes out of this is that there's in fact nobody that's even close to being average, because, and everyone who studies, this is more esoteric, but if you study like high dimensional spaces or things like this, what you find is that, yeah, you could have close to average arms, but do you have close to average arms and legs and eyes? And as that number gets bigger, the odds that that is true over and over again is just astronomically small. So they did another study in pilots in fighter jets. And so they had built like an average cockpit. And so what they did is they moved away from that and they changed it to where you could adjust the arm length, you could adjust they put all these adjustments in. And what they saw was that that deaths of fighter pilots plummeted when they did that because they were under extreme stress. Those little changes made a big difference, and you can't do that. And so when you think about personalized medicine, that's why like there's this interesting analysis that Nick Short did where he claims that and we put this in the book too, but he claims that of the top 10 selling drugs in the United States, they only work for 10% of people. You can imagine how much money that is too. So nice if you're the pharma company, not so great if you're the person. Now I have gotten some pushback on that, which I'll mention in a moment. But it is fascinating because they're looking at the number needed to treat. So if you're taking this because you're hoping to not get the heart disease, so it could have 50% it could lower your risk by 50%, right? But what that might mean on your absolute risk is you had a 99% chance of not getting it, and then you got a 98% chance of not getting it. So for most of you, right, didn't make any difference. For that one person, it made a lot. And so we call this, right, this number needed to treat so that you get one, and that's what we do. But the deeper you could actually understand these processes and getting to what we're trying to get to in the age of scientific wellness that we're talking about is if you can, and with the N of 1 analyzer, could you get much, much more specific so that it has a very high likelihood of working in you as opposed to, doing these population averages. And I don't mean that to come off as too negative. We are where we're at, right? I mean, that's a very reasonable thing for us to do, but it's not nirvana, right? It's not where we really want to be.
So based on, like, if folks here get the genomic test, and folks here, maybe some of them get their microbiome tested, is that going to be, would that be any help in knowing whether this particular drug I'm taking is really helping me, or this supplement? Are we there yet? And if we are there, what are the areas where we've arrived?
So we're not quite there yet. We are there in the sense that there are definitely certain tests that you could take and that you could monitor for efficacy. Like, if you're taking a statin, you're monitoring LDL cholesterol, right? There's certain things like that, right? If you decide you want to take vitamin D, well, you can measure that out of your blood. If you want to do, there's some interesting new mitochondrial tests, right? If you're taking, like, urolithin A or something like that then you could see if that's having an effect. I'm very interested in cardiovascular markers right now because I have a sauna that I just got. I'm very excited about it. And so it's a nice, happy place for my wife and I to like chat in the evening and get some health benefit. Saunas have huge health benefits. The data out on that for cardiovascular is great. If you do it like 4 to 7 times a week, it's huge. I think it's like 60% reduction or something. It's massive. So there's a lot of, so you can get into these areas. So there are ways to get feedback. What I think is not quite there, and we are of course racing to build this, is I think the AI systems, what we want is like kind of something that's much more all-encompassing so that you can bring a lot of this disparate information and it will make sense of it for you and get it back. I think that the technology is there. I don't have any doubts that we can build that. In fact, we're pretty far down the road on some of those pieces. I think it's just a function of getting it out. My bigger worry is sort of what the regulatory space kind of looks like and how hard it will be to kind of how many roadblocks there'll be to getting things out, especially if you can try to do it from a wellness space, because there's many things that you do in isolation with kind of not much information right now, and we could make so many of those things much better. And so I'm hopeful that we can find like a good space to where we can accelerate quick, with all the safeguards that you want, but also if you're not talking about, when you're talking about lifestyle and and things like that, we should be able to push some of those things pretty quickly, I hope. So we'll figure that out.
So we've run over time, but I don't think anybody's minded about that at all. So thank you, Nathan, for being here. We are very, very fortunate to have you here. Really exciting stuff. So, this event has been recorded. You will get notice. You will be able to view it at your leisure. Please feel free to share it with friends and family. I am happy to announce that we are booking our next community seminar series. I will be back in July for the first of it, so be on the lookout for information about that. Clinical trials, we're doing them here at the Buck. Some of Nathan's collaborators are involved in some of them. I think there probably will be some folks from the clinical research team out in the atrium afterwards. Feel free to talk to them about the clinical trials if you're interested in participating. It's been a joy to be doing this and to have folks here coming to the Institute to be involved in them. Keep up with us. You can on our website, you can sign up for our newsletter. That's the best way to keep in touch with what's happening here. We also have a blog you can sign up for, and you can read about some of the inside scoop behind the stories about what happens here at the Buck. We have a great, very popular online learning course if you want to know more about the biology of aging. And we have a great podcast. We're not getting any younger yet. And we're just starting on the next season of that. We have great interviews with the researchers in aging from all across the country that I think you would really enjoy. Come on a tour. If you haven't been on a tour, come. We have them on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings. We have a new museum exhibit as part of the tours. We're getting good reviews. People really like them. And obviously, I would be remiss if I did not encourage you to support the Buck. Hopefully, you have been inspired by the generosity of the Levy family. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. So with that, once again, I want all of us to thank the Levy family, and I hope to see you back here soon. Thank you.